to the open side. Bete, up the ball here to Simon, who's quick. Pete Simon looking for Bete. Back to Simon. Oh, that is wonderful. That is wild. That is amazing from the Wallabies.
Hi there, welcome to Pick and Drive Rugby. We are the People's Podcast, providing a platform for rugby lovers to come together and support the game that's played in heaven. I'm your host, Mitch. Joining me this week is Lockie. Lockie, how are you, mate?
Very good. Ready for more rugby. It's been one of the biggest weeks of rugby I can remember, actually, with everything going on. How about you, man? How are you?
Yeah, we've got a Wallabies win to talk about, which is only the second time this year that we can talk about the men in orange getting the W. So very much looking forward to chatting through that. We'll dive through World Cup week 4. We've got one more week of pool games to go before we get into quarterfinals. Doesn't look too good for the Aussies, but we won't get into that just yet. You've been pretty busy over the weekend. Lots of rugby work for you. What have you been doing?
Oh, there's been plenty on, actually. We've had the Australian Rugby Shield on up at Ballymore in Brisbane, which has been a heap of fun. For those who don't know, it's the sort of showpiece amateur event for Australian rugby. So that's, Queensland Country Healers, New South Wales Country Cockatoos and Corellas, your smaller states like Tassie, South Australia, some representatives from the Northern Territory. So we had 16 teams in total, 8 in the men's, 8 in the women's, and a couple of really good games across that. I think ACT took it out in the men's again, the Griffins. So they went back-to-back from their title last year, and New South Wales Country Corellas won the ladies' championship in an all-country final against Queensland Country Orchids. So a lot of names that you might not know, but I strongly encourage you to go tune in. We have full recaps on rugby.com.au and full live streams as well. So some really good quality bush footy.
Awesome. So we'll touch a little bit on that at the end of the podcast and get some of your thoughts on that and maybe some of the other discussions around pathways and things that RA has been doing in the past few weeks, which has been really exciting to see. We've also, as I said at the start, we'll do week 4 of Rugby World Cup. We'll talk about the Wallabies, which is why everyone's here. Very much looking forward to that. And we'll also touch on the Wallaroos as well. So they played their second test against the Black Ferns for the Laura O'Reilly Cup. And unfortunately, they did get beaten, but we will try and be positive around that one and focus on some of the better things that the Wallaroos did in that game. For those that are following along at home or are joining in on our tipping comp, let's get into the results. So as we said before, this is week 4 of World Cup. So we've got one more week of pool games and then we're into the quarterfinals. Again, if you haven't joined the comp yet, jump in. Why not? It's probably a little bit late for you, but everyone's welcome. So the code's up on the screen for you. The link is on our social media platform as well. So do get involved there. Well done to Kakadu, who's currently taking out the comp in first place on 358 points, followed very closely by Felix 9, who I believe was in first place last week. So Kakadu's had a really good week this week in his tips. Felix 9 in second place is on 328. So 30 points between the two of those. We've got... that's a difficult name. Ori Lieb in third place on 316 and N.A. Williams in fourth place on 280. So there's a little bit of room between sort of fourth, fifth, sixth and first place, but there's still a lot of rugby to be played in the tournament. So don't forget to get your tips in and make sure you're still sort of putting those in weekly. And we've sort of, what is different about this comp from what we've done in the past with Super Brew is that you get to pick or try and pick your opening try scorer each week. If you can get that, I got that this week against the New Zealand game, picked Will Jordan to be first try scorer, and I think it picked me up an extra 15 points or something. So there is ways to get back up the charts if you are not in the top 10. So do keep with it. Lockie, do you have an update on how our fantasy is going?
Yeah, fantasy's ticking on quite nicely, actually. Quickly, you and I have slipped down a little further than I would have liked. We're sitting almost bang in the middle. I'm on 52 with you hot in pursuit in 58th position. But there are some people absolutely flying along at the moment. And then with the tipping as well, doing a bit better, actually. I'm in 17th, you're in 23rd. We're yet to identify where Ando is. So speak up from your Balinese holiday. Tell us what your username is so we can out you. And let us know how you kick on. But make sure you jump in for your fantasy as well. If you haven't used your triple captain already, all the more power to you because I busted mine in the first round. And if you did Darcy Graham this week, then congratulations because you racked up just under 400 points.
And if you did like I did and went with Rieko Ioane, then you basically wasted your pick. And he only got less than 100 points with the triple. So not too impressed with his performance this week, but nevertheless, a week's time, those do reset for the quarters, I believe. So I'll be using those very wisely when we come to the quarterfinals. But I think that's it for the intro. Why don't we just dive into the rugby and get into the chat?
Let's go.
Awesome. Let's go. It's time to be optimistic. It's time to be excited. The Wallabies have recorded their second win under Eddie Jones in 2023. Their second win of the tournament in Rugby World Cup 2024. We did beat Portugal 34-14. Now, this wasn't a good performance, I'll say from the start, from the Wallabies. They did everything they needed to do, though. They did secure a bonus point, and they didn't let Portugal get a bonus point. So, Lockie, where should we start with this? What were your initial thoughts coming out of the game?
If you're marking this one, it's a C- in every sense of the grade. You've scraped over the line. You've done everything you need to do to, keep whatever faint hope I think Australian fans can try and hold on to about quarterfinals alive. They got the bonus point, but I don't think there was a point in this match outside that window between the 20th and the 25th minute where we scored 3 tries where we looked convincing. It was really interesting to see how we'd be able to back up from Wales and the disappointment of those back-to-back defeats. And by and large, I'd left with just as many questions, I think, as we've been given answers over this tournament. We had patches, that one patch, but Portugal had a player in the bin. So how much stock can you put in 3 quick-fire tries in 5 minutes? I felt like the second half we locked down when we could have or should have even been pressing to score more aggressively. And there's still issues around our discipline and giving away penalties and admittedly 2 really soft yellows. I think we'll touch on that in a tick, but I still don't quite know what to make of this Wallabies team or in what direction it's headed. What did you take out of it?
I think if there's one word I can use to describe this performance, and it probably can be applied to the whole campaign under Eddie Jones thus far, is rudderless. We just seem to be lacking in direction, lacking in decisions at key times in this game. The Wallabies scored first. They got a penalty in Portugal's 22, and we all know coming into this game that the Wallabies needed to secure the 4-try bonus point. Yet their first decision was to go for the posts. Now, I don't inherently have any issues with going for points. We know this is a Rugby World Cup, and we know that you need to apply scoreboard pressure to your opposition to really squeeze them and be as effective as you can in a tournament as tight as this is. But it's not a tactic that we have seen from the Wallabies in previous games. We haven't seen it against Fiji. We didn't see it against Wales. Those were the times where going for points were probably the best decision to make. And we didn't do it. Yet when we need to score 4 tries, the first opportunity we get, we kick for posts. It was really kind of confusing.
Yeah, I think it sort of lends into that uncertainty around the whole campaign that we've seen. What Wallaby team is turning up and what plan do they have? And we still don't really know. I think sort of as fans looking in, we don't quite understand the grand designs. I think from the get-go, the opening 60 to 90 seconds, I was actually really excited by what I saw because the Wallabies played with great shape. We retained the ball for about, I think it was 12 phases. We sort of had a chip in front midway through, so 6 either side of a kick down the right touchline, and we went 80 metres from the kickoff in total. And then ball gets slapped away, it's called a knock-on, and we didn't have that same direction for the other 79 minutes. We obviously had, those nice patches. I thought the way that Fraser McWright moved across the field for his try on the right in the second half was really good awareness, good match awareness. But, I still can't put much stock in that 3-try blitz that ultimately got us there. We got a player in the bin, Bell runs over the top of someone. We get the maul try. Richie Arnold goes across from a nice bust. But, outside of that 5-minute window, really, what did we see to suggest that we were even a better team than Portugal? I mean, I thought Os Lobos played really well. They threw the ball around. They straightened up their attack nicely. I mean, and they crossed more than the 2 tries that they were allowed. They had some really near misses, and we've probably got a fair bit of thanking to do for Andrew Kellaway, especially for that try saver in the first half. I mean, what a tackle that was. That was brilliant stuff.
Yeah, I think the thing that for me coming out of this game that I was unimpressed with from the Wallabies was that Portugal, as good as they were in this game, they're amateurs. They even said in their post-match after the Georgia game, like, we've got to remember that we're not professional athletes at this point. We're not professional rugby players. And yet for us to only beat them by 20 points and requiring, as you said, requiring a yellow card, a player down, and just a flurry of points in quick succession, we should be putting them away by a lot more than that for this being our best team. Australia A played Portugal in a warm-up, and the scoreline was pretty similar to what this one was. I think it was 30-17 or something like that. So it was pretty similar scoreline overall in that game. But we should be putting a lot more points on them. And to Portugal's credit, they put us under a lot of pressure, and they kept with us for the majority of the game. I mean, they scored first. They scored a really good try first up in the opening 10 minutes of the game, which was just a really poor decision from our defensive line to, first of all, be so far in from their wing. Marika Koroibete is always consistently at this World Cup marking the man inside his channel with a player outside him, and then biting into the line, shooting up out of the line when all he needed to do was sort of follow the ball and shimmy that player into touch. He shoots out of the line in no man's land, and they run through and score outside him. Like, that's a great try from Portugal, but that's not a try that a top 10 tier nation in the world should be allowing at a World Cup.
I agree, but you got to say that was a hell of a ball from Thomas Appleton. I think that was just gorgeous flat pass, left to right. I imagine if we'd been seeing some of that throughout our World Cup, I would have been calling that one of the tries of the tournament. But yeah, I think you're right about that killer instinct, I think we can call it, because after those 3 quick tries, I know I've harped on in that block, but that's where you flip that killer switch and you just start scoring at will. That's what we've seen teams like Scotland, South Africa, Ireland, New Zealand, France do really effectively. Coincidentally, the top 5 teams in the world throughout the tournament is flip that switch from a 20-point margin, then it's suddenly 50 points. And they're able to execute ruthlessly. And we had a moment there where just after those 3 tries, Izzy Parisi busts through the line and we march up the field again. It looks like we're about to, go in for the kill, go for the jugular. And inexplicably, it breaks down for us. We don't capitalize from the penalties that we get inside the attacking 22 again. And then we don't score until Fraser McWright crosses in the second half. That was the moment there where I think Australia could have had a defining block of time where we put 4, 5, 6 tries on and showed that we're capable of putting these teams away and show that we're a cut above. I think we missed that opportunity to show that we're a cut above at the moment. So I'm really interested to see your take on whether the Wallabies are a cut above at the moment, because it didn't look like it on the field.
We need to talk about the selections in this game. So Carter Gordon, again, was left out of the 23 by Eddie Jones. He was initially named on the bench, and he did pick up an injury leading into the game. I believe it was on Thursday morning or afternoon in training that he picked up a niggle and wasn't fit to be featured in the 23. So Samu Kerevi comes onto the bench as a replacement. Now, that's the second point, Samu Kerevi. I'll get to that in a minute. But we've got Ben Donaldson at 10. We've got Ben Donaldson at 10. We've got Andrew Kellaway at 15. We've got a completely new centre pairing that we haven't had at any World Cup game so far in the tournament, Isaiah Parisi and Lalakai Fekete. Now, as good as they are, and as much cohesion as they have at the Waratahs, and they are the centre pairing for New South Wales, they have no minutes together in a gold jersey starting for the Wallabies. They have no minutes with Andrew Kellaway behind them. So, again, we're talking about this consistently week in, week out. We were talking about this in 2019, and that was one of the killer instincts for Michael Cheika, was that he just didn't know what his best 23 was. He was consistently chopping and changing throughout the tournament Again, 4 years later, we're doing the same thing. We've got players coming in, they're playing out of position, they're playing with players they're not familiar with. How can we expect this team to be a cohesive, well-drilled unit that's led well, that has key understanding of what they need to do at certain areas of the field when you've got new players coming in consistently week in, week out?
You can't. You can't. And it also boils down to having that connection throughout the year. Yes, Lafayette and Izzy Parisi playing together at the Tars. Often that's been outside Dono or with Dono at fullback. But in what world do we expect, an internationally based Samu Karevi, who's been partnering occasionally with Ikitau or Parisi or others throughout the year, suddenly gel with Jordi Pataya as an outside centre who's still finding his feet? Why would we expect those combinations to work effectively if we don't lay the foundation early, either through the super club systems in Australia or whether people are playing together abroad? At this point, I'm not really fussed how you're doing it, but there needs to be a cohesive base between those key links, like your 12, 13, your 9, 10, having links between your hookers and your locks. I mean, it's a bit of a patchwork that we've seen Eddie pick from so far this year. And I think, when we do a bit of a post-mortem on this, selection, as you've highlighted, is going to be the biggest of Eddie's downfalls at this World Cup. I think we can say, sure, we're not out of it yet, but we're all expecting Fiji to win comfortably against Portugal, I think we can say. And I don't think we'd be in this position without some key players who have stayed at home for this time. So we're going to have some really interesting conversations, I think, over the next month, dissecting how the World Cup looks, even if we do, inexplicably make a quarterfinal and roll on. But I'm excited to really sink my teeth into that autopsy later.
Wake up, Lockie, wake up. You're in dreamland right now.
What?
Wake up. There's no chance. There's realistically no chance that Fiji aren't going to get a losing bonus points against Portugal.
No,
as good as Portugal was against us, there's no chance. Going back to the point I mentioned before around Samu Karevi, it's come out in the post-match presser that Eddie Jones's backup fly half option, should Ben Donaldson go down this week, was to throw Samu Karevi in at 10. Now, that in itself, that decision deserves to be instantly kicked out of any rugby club in Australia. That's just ludicrous. To be at a World Cup, to not have a backup fly half option when your primary fly half option goes down injured, and then to throw in a centre and just say, yeah, you'll do Samu Karevi, and the player that has the least amount of cohesion than anyone else in the squad. Yes, potentially Jordi Pataya, I would say, okay, well, he knows Tate, he knows some of the Reds players. Lalakai Feketi, he knows Donaldson. You could potentially draw a line there, but Samu Karevi being your backup fly or your third choice fly half option, ridiculous.
I thought it was Josh Kemeny.
That's the other thing we'll have to talk about in our postmortem too. What's the go with the utility option? He's been talking about the utility for weeks and weeks and weeks. In all of his teams he's selected, he's got this utility option, yet not once did we see Josh Kemeny pop up at fly half. On the wing, did we ever see Ben Donaldson packing in the side of a scrum, or Dylan Peach even make a squad? So, geez, it's crazy. Let's get back to the game, though. The one positive we can be somewhat excited about is that after countless efforts this year, the Wallabies got a try from a rolling maul.
And we also conceded one from a pushover try and should have had one from a maul. So you got to take the good with the bad. But yeah, we finally saw it, and it came easy too. And it makes you think about how much of a weapon that did used to be. I think we saw that core of the Brumbies team, and the McKellar ball and the Larkham ball, and I think it was Folau Fainga at the time, just scoring tries for fun through the years for the Brumbies, and then feeding that into the Wallabies. But I miss it. It's a funny thing to say that you miss. Having just an effective rolling maul, but just through some of these games on the weekend, the Springboks did it with such effect against Tonga. We've seen teams like France lean on it already throughout the tournament, and you forget how useful and how pivotal even that rolling maul is. So for us to finally go over is great, but I mean, we could have had it a couple of games earlier, maybe.
And we probably could have done more than one in a season. Like, how many attempts did we have under Eddie Jones this year, in our 8 games, how many attempts did we have at the rolling maul? It would have been 15, 16, and we scored off one of them. So it's just not good enough, considering that the stocks of players that we have, that Dan Palmer comes from the Brumbies, has been an integral part of their maul attack and their scrum dominance in Super Rugby Pacific this year, comes into the Wallaby setup and for some reason is shifted into the line-out tactician and isn't given control of the scrum at all. And we just don't look dominant in that area at all this season. It's just, again, mind games by Eddie, just utter confusion. And the fact that we haven't scored more points from that set piece is just a worrying sign that hopefully in 2024, if Eddie Jones does continue in the role, it's something he needs to focus on.
Totally agree. And it comes back down to tournament rugby, right? We see time and time again Rugby World Cups, barring 2015, where you had a team of legends in that All Black side. Every World Cup winning team has been built on set piece and has been built on a goal kicker. Our set piece hasn't fired, and Ben Donaldson currently is not a gun goal kicker. I don't know what we have to try and reframe to hammer down those 2 points, but you don't win World Cups without those 2 things. And we haven't shown enough to earn, I think, at this point, a quarterfinal spot or deserve our place in that playoff field. So plenty to watch on. And then as we start to unpack some of these other games, Mitch, we're going to see, that the metronomic kicking and the set piece is what those big 5 teams are rolling out this tournament.
I mean, it's so hard not to just keep asking these questions of Eddie Jones and just saying what the plan was. We will do that in a few weeks' time. We will do a deep dive. But as you said, it's World Cup 101 to have these set piece keys. And Eddie Jones is the most successful World Cup coach, that he has had the most success out of any individual in world rugby for as many nations. And yet you would think that he would come into a World Cup with those 3 things: set piece, goal kicking, and I guess a backup fly half, as just decisions that you can't not have. And we don't have any of them. So again, we will have to unpack that as we move forward. One thing that we've been speaking about for the Wallabies for years now, as long as Ando and I have made this podcast, is their discipline. Now, this game, again, 2 yellow cards against a team like Portugal. Now, Portugal did get a yellow card themselves, but it's not good enough, the amount of penalties that we're giving away, that we're playing 20 minutes of the game with a player down. And these yellow cards even overlap. So at one point, for multiple minutes in this game, we were 13 players.
Can we talk about this mirror image Sama yellow? Because we saw the exact same thing in 2019, where at the time it looked like he's been yellow carded for running into someone too hard. And it looks like the same thing happens again. So from what I saw, Karevi's been, yellow carded, a touch before halftime for a collision leading with the forearm, and he's been done for dangerous contact to the head. I'm sorry, but in what world is your head supposed to be at that height regardless, trying to tackle Samu Karevi? Why are you charging in like that? Why are you even in a position to put yourself at risk as the tackler? And then secondly, rant ongoing, why did he do it again? Why did he do it again? We've seen it costing a World Cup. And imagine if that doubled down and something spiraled out of control without a Karevi on the field. I might have got the timings wrong, but I don't understand the penalty for starters. And then I don't understand why you would repeat it, even if that's the case. Talk to me about this, Mitch.
So for mine, the issue came from the fact that he lifted his elbow, and that's what the referee and the teammate were talking about, the fact that his elbow was up. And therefore, by lifting his elbow into contact, he's put his arm and his forearm, or his fist and his wrist and his forearm, in a dangerous situation between himself and the tackler. So when he then makes contact and goes to palm, he makes contact with his forearm to the player's head. Now, say what you will, it's poor technique. Why he needs to lift his elbow up so high to do that, he's just made a mistake in that instance. Whether it's warranted a yellow card or not, I don't necessarily agree with. I would have been happy with a penalty, but I can understand that where they're coming from, and that they're saying that, look, he's made contact with the player's head. It's the same as making shoulder contact in a tackle attempt. The fact that it's happened twice in 2 World Cups, I wonder if they do go back and somehow have, I don't know, like they're just aware of that it happened in 2019, and so they're like, oh, he's done it again. Let's pull it up, because there has been instances like this in other games in this World Cup. There's been instances like this in other games in the past 4 years that haven't been penalised, that haven't been looked at in such a way. I do wonder if it's whether just the way that Samu Krevi runs, in that he runs so upright and sort of his shoulders are back. He's not really leaning forward, that his momentum when he comes into contact sort of shifts straight into that ball carrier as he arrives. But the fact that he's been pinged twice now is frustrating from an Australian fan.
It is frustrating, but also to me, and maybe I'm underselling or overselling the safety element. I'm not sure, but this is a high impact collision sport, and I think what we saw was a rugby incident. So if you're getting yourself in a position to tackle, he wasn't running in, with an elbow pointed towards him, trying to spear him like a fish. This is a rugby collision. I don't think there's anything sinister about those kind of contacts, and maybe I'm in the wrong here, but for that to be a yellow card when we've seen head-on-head high impact, no mitigating factors in other games that have gone uncited and unpenalised, I think that's the root of this frustration. I look to incident like the Jesse Creel incident against, was it Scotland or Ireland, where he's collected someone head on head, front on at high speed, and the referees just played on. Whereas a glancing blow in the act of a palm is considered a yellow. And it's these decisions. I don't think it's the referee's fault by any means, but it's the overarching management of rugby and how certain things are officiated that drive this frustration. I mean, and we're people that watch rugby and breathe rugby. We adore it, and we're still getting pissed off by this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So what does the casual fan think?
And that's the thing too. Like we've got two separate thoughts on it too. Like you think that it shouldn't be a yellow card. You think it shouldn't even be a penalty. I'm happy with it being a penalty, but probably the yellow card threshold there. You've got head contact, so that always confuses things, and they get a bit iffy when there is head contact there. But the line of is it a yellow card threshold or is it just a rugby collision at the moment is just so grey, and we don't have clear enough wording in the law book to differentiate between the two. The other thing too, I think, and we'll talk about the other incident, the other yellow card too, and how the TMOs approach that. But it almost feels, and it does feel a lot at this World Cup and in the past few years in rugby, that whenever the TMO brings something to the referee is automatically sort of at a decision. I very rarely see a referee overturn it and say, actually, I think that's fine. I don't think that there's anything in that. That's just a rugby incident. Let's play on. Like in this instance, the referee has brought that to who? What was the referee's name in this one? Do you remember?
I can't. Sorry.
Anyway, so the TMO brings the Samu Krevi incident to the referee, and immediately from that point, he's talking about whether it's a card or not. He's not just talking about whether it's a penalty. He's already made a decision at that point that yes, there has been foul play. We're in that. It's not. He's not just looking at it blind and saying, actually, I think that's fine. Let's play on. And that brings me to the other point too. The other yellow card that we got to Matt Fazler. In that instance, that was really messy. The way that they went through that process was messy. The TMO's trying to show one thing. The referee's looking at something else. Then Matthew Renal comes in and starts talking about something completely different. And then the whole process takes 5 or 6 minutes where everyone's just standing around not really knowing what's going on.
And that's exactly, I think, typifying what we're so frustrated about. There is not a clear line of process and procedure to make TMO and MO decisions at these events. So 5 or 6 minutes is lost spectators for my mind. If you're a casual fan tuning in and you've got 3 referees standing around talking about a collapsed maul over a try line, you're not waiting around for 5 or 6 minutes watching replays of people falling over each other. this isn't, highlights reels. This isn't, a recap of the game so far. They went frame by frame for that entire duration, and it bored me. I was over it. So those kinds of incidents are going to drive people away.
I think controversially, potentially, I don't know, I'll get your thoughts on this. I think they got this whole process wrong. So what happens in real time is that they give the yellow card to Fessler and say that you've collapsed them all, and so you're off. 16 golds, come here, you've collapsed them all, off. And then the TMO interjects and says, we need to check this try. And so we need to go and have a look whether number 2, I believe it was, actually scores the try or not. And then going through that process, they realized that he dropped the ball knocked it on into, I think it was Fal Masili coming through to tackle him. But my issue was with that whole process is then if 16 Fessler has come through and collapsed them all, then how is it play on and how are they allowed to score off it if the mall's collapsed? So has he either collapsed or has he not collapsed them all? So you've just said that 16 hasn't collapsed them all, yet it's play on, and so then they've potentially scored? Like, I feel like going through the TMO process, they kind of overlooked the thought that Fessler had done anything wrong. Am I wrong?
Time my brain and knots there. Yeah, well, I mean, in that situation, if the maul is collapsed but the ball is playable, then it's advantage, right? So then he would have scored a try under advantage, but it's knock on, so you go back for a penalty, in which case it's a card. But for my mind, if you have a collapsed maul in a try-scoring position and the collapse has been cynical, then it's a penalty try and an automatic card.
Collapse. That's the ruling. That is the ruling by the law book. If you've collapsed the maul in the process of it scoring a try, then it's a penalty try. But Fessler doesn't actually stop the maul at any point. He comes through and sort of attempts to tackle the player with the ball, realizes that he's sort of gone off his feet, lets go, and the maul keeps going. So he doesn't actually effectively collapse the maul at all. And the player with the ball then goes on to try and score the try. So what foul play has Fessler actually committed in that instance? The maul hasn't collapsed. If the instance that a maul goes to ground, the ball doesn't have to come out of it. The Wallabies are well within their rights at that instance to just dive over the top of it and keep it in there. It's a collapsed maul. It probably would be a penalty try in that instance, but that's not what happened. The maul continued. So I was just sitting there watching it going, well, can we bring Fessler back on because he actually hasn't collapsed that? Like if he had collapsed the maul, there's no way that the guy holding the ball can then try and score the try, can he? Because he would have been taken to ground. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but it also proves our earlier point that it's too hard to officiate at this point, and that
it's just too complicated.
There's too much that can go wrong, and there's too much that people are looking for to go wrong. And that simplification of laws around, without issuing safety, the simplification of some of these laws, I think, is critical for the long-term success of Australian rugby. Not, dumbing down the laws or making it easier for people to get off with foul play, but just simplifying it so we don't have situations where the referees are going on about it for 6 or 7 minutes in real time at a World Cup in front of a crowd that was pretty spicy, I thought, at times. Instead of Eddie, booing kicks at goal, having a crack at the Aussies, having a crack at Eddie in particular. It was an interesting atmosphere, but you bang on. This was a strange just couple of minutes, that block.
Yeah, and the fact that the TMO thought one thing, the referee thought something else, and then the touch judge thought something else as well. Just confusing. The whole thing was confusing. We've spoken a lot around this game, though. Was there anything else? And we do need to move on. I'm conscious of time. Is there any sort of final comments or anything else you wanted to focus on in this game? Anyone that really stood out to you as a really big impact on this game, or someone you might have expected to see a little bit more from?
I thought Izzy Parisi had a pretty good game. I was fairly happy with him on that side of attack. I think that's always been his strongest attribute is his running game. A couple of good line butts. There was one moment though, and I'll sort of leave us hanging on this, that stood out for me, and it was towards the end in the lead up to Corabetti's try, which was ultimately our last try. We make a big line break, bust through, and then we have maybe a 6-on-2 overlap out to the left. And Isaac finds Leawasha, runs directly across field and cuts off any opportunity for us to use that overlap. And it was actually quite fortuitous that we eventually got close to the line and Corabetti just Corabetti his way over. But just the game sense at that point to not look up, I feel like maybe that's what's defined, along with the ill discipline and strange selection. Not playing what's in front of you might just be the root cause of what we've seen at this World Cup, because I thought at test level that's unconscionable, running across the field on a 6-2 split and almost bombing a certain try. But I don't know, maybe I've been too down about this game. Have you got a bright spark to finish us on?
I've got a point that we'll finish on in a second. It's the next slide of our slideshow. The final thing I wanted to just touch on was, and you briefly sort of mentioned it, was just our kind of, there was no clear understanding of what the game plan was, and there hasn't been a clear game plan throughout this World Cup. And it felt very much like the first half we had one style of game plan, and in the second half we had another one. Like, it felt the first half like it was just like it has been against Wales, like it has been against Fiji, single runner, one up hit offs, being to bust the game line and just sort of big forward pack dominance. We did that in the first half. We got a few tries from it. Angus burrowed over. We got the driving maul. In the second half, it seemed like we resorted more to a kicking game, similar to what we did in South Africa in the first game of the Rugby Champs this year. We were more inclined to kick the ball away and sort of try and test Portugal more tactically in the air, which hasn't really been a key element of our game this year. And it didn't seem like at that point we didn't have the 4-try bonus point either. So I don't really know why we shifted from one style of play to another, and it kind of just added a whole nother layer of complexity to an already overcomplicated and confused squad.
Yeah, I think overcomplicated and confused might just be the title of this episode. Even with a win, that's how he looked out there. And I think we can't sum it up any nicer than that.
Well, there's some news that's come out of Wallabies camp today as we go to record this evening. And that is, and this hasn't been officially confirmed by Wallabies sources, but it has been reported by Stan and the wide world of sport. So they have announced that Wallabies great Marika Corabetti is set to retire from Test rugby at the end of this year, and that is somewhat leaked by roommate and close friend of Marika Corabetti, Pone Faumasili. Now, he has said that nothing has been officially confirmed by Corabetti or his party at this point of recording, but Pone did an interview, I believe this afternoon, with journalists or potentially last night even, in France, and said that there was a few players that will be finishing up with the Wallabies this year at the World Cup. Now, I'll get your thoughts on Marika finishing up first, and then we'll look at the Dan Palmer comment coming up next.
This is a funny one. I haven't heard anything about it from any source, actually, so it's the first time I've sort of got my ears around it. But I don't think it would be surprising to see Marika at his last World Cup. He's 31. I can't imagine that he's going to be running around, for 2027, given the crop of wingers that we've got coming through. And the man is still an absolute monster, smashing people over for Saitama Wild Knights and having a good time in Japan League One. So whether he's coming back, I think, is a kind of a moot point. He's in Japan and he'll play out a couple of years there. Whether it's an automatic retirement, I'm not sure. But it's an interesting one. Marika, it's got up here on the tile for those watching via YouTube and for those listening. It says Wallabies great. And until this point, I hadn't actually thought of him about, the kind of legacy of Marika Corabetti. But I think you'd almost have to put him in those kind of conversations, not immediately, but the body of work to pinch a Turanui line that Marika's put together over the past 5-6 years has been incredible, especially given where the Wallabies have been at as a team. There's a constant out on the wing, regardless of how we've been going, who just gives it his absolute everything, who is more often than not in a World 15 or a World 23, throughout this block of time. And he's a genuine superstar of the game for a while there. Even as recently as last year, he was the talking point, with that huge tackle in Adelaide and the running rivalry with Mpipi and some great highlights out of the 2019 Rugby World Cup, that try against Georgia. where he runs through about 8 blokes, goes 60 meters, and puts us back in front. He is a superstar. So maybe if this is the end for him, and we always look back more fondly after the fact, maybe Marika will be remembered as a Wallabies great of the modern era.
Yeah, and I think you've also got to remember he's 2-time John Eales medalist as well. So he's up there with Michael Hooper as the amount of times he's won that medal. And I mean, he's putting his hand up and putting in a good shift in 2023 as well to potentially go out on a high there. So I think looking forward though, as well, like as you said, a great of the Wallabies backline. He's probably one of the first players currently in this team that's picked on the team sheet. So if we look to a Wallabies team in 2024 and we don't have Marika Korobeti's name on the team sheet, there's a glaring hole there. And who's going to fill that spot at the moment? Yes, we have some upcoming wingers that are showing potential, but I don't think they're going to be as impactful on the game that Marika is and has been. So all the best to him and his family for the future. If this does end up being the last time that he does pull on the gold jersey, he's had an incredible career with the Wallabies. We were uncertain, like Suli Vunivalu, when he first came over into the 15-man code from league, whether he would stick it out long term and what impact he would bring. But I don't think anyone would be remiss in throwing his name in with the likes of Matt Rogers, Lottie Takuri, and Wendell Saylor as some of the best players and the best talent that's come in from league into the 15-man code. And it's so good to see that he has stuck through it and with it, and that he will finish his career over in Japan, hopefully getting a lot of Japanese yen for his buck. Now, one of the other thing that has come out in that article by the Wide World of Sports is a quote from Dan Palmer. So he says, and if you're not following along on YouTube and you're listening along, I will read it out. So it is the end of the line for some people, Palmer said on Monday. Some for whom this tournament will be the last time with the Wallabies. So there's mixed emotions. We spoke about performance, but just trying to enjoy the time together. We've got the thing is there. We've got something these last few weeks. So he goes on to heavily imply that there are a few players in this Wallaby setup that will be hanging their boots up at the end of 2023. We don't really yet have any confirmation at who that is and what those players are. So I guess it's time to spitball and to sort of get our thoughts on who we think that might be. And I guess reflect on some of the players and the impact that they've had for the Wallabies in 2023.
I think off the bat, we look at a James Slipper. I don't think that's a stretch to imagine that a 34-year-old, dual prop, 21 World Cup caps, and he's a Wallaby captain and a Centurion. I can't imagine he's got much more left in the tank at test level. He has signed on. He's sticking around through to, I think, 25 with the Brumbies. So maybe he's the kind of player that kicks on and rolls on. But I think if anyone's deserved it, it's probably Slips. I can't imagine that he'll go willingly, but pretty cool to see him, still kicking around after 21 World Cup games. As far as people who are, perhaps not of the age of James Slipper, but might be looking to shift away, the bulk of that squad's so young.
Yeah.
So, where do you really look to? The back line probably has an average age of 25, generously given, you've got your Nwanganita-Wasis and your Fiketis and your Parisis in there. You take McDermott still young. Gosh, you're going to have to help me out here because Slipper stood out for age, but he signed on. So, help us out.
I think Samu Kerevi is another one that springs to mind as a player who might not be featuring for the Wallabies again in the future. We know that he plays, like Marika, he plays his rugby in Japan, and that in the past, without a World Cup, I think that's been a bargaining point for him to be able to go to his club and say, look, Australia needs me. I'm going to the World Cup. You want this. I want this. Let's see what we can do. But without that lure of the World Cup, I don't think he's going to have as easily to be able to barter to get out of his Japanese contract and to go and play just international rugby for the Wallabies. And whether we need him is another sort of talking point as well. We saw this week the centre pairing of Isaiah Parisi and Nelakai Fiketti probably looked a little bit more cohesive and go forward than what Pataya and Kerevi has been in this World Cup to date.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think, I wouldn't begrudge Samu Kerevi if this was the time that he stops playing internationally. He's been and like Marika, actually, such a standout in the gold jersey for the past, better part of the last decade. And, when he first came on through the scene, was a young captain at Queensland as well. He was, mooted as the next big thing in world rugby. I think wasn't long ago, actually, he was on a podcast with Matt Giddo, and, Gitz is saying, Karevi right now still is the world's best 12. He's got that kind of rap. And it'd be a shame. It'd be a real shame to lose him, but he's already based overseas. I mean, these things happen. But, I mean, really, Mitch, help me out here. Point me to another Wallaby in this squad that's, been included in this squad that's north of 30 and would look like retiring from Test rugby. Do we have candidates?
Geez, I mean, Dave Parecki is north of 30, but you wouldn't expect with his Test cap and his experience thus far that he'd be hanging the boots up just yet. So outside of that, it's pretty confusing what this kind of means and whether he's talking about potentially just the Wallabies environment in general. So Michael Hooper stepping away and Quade Cooper, some of those players that aren't necessarily in France right now, but have contributed for the Wallabies in the past few years, whether that is taken into consideration. James O'Connor, another one. Yeah, interesting. It'll be interesting to see what and how that sort of shapes moving forward over the next few weeks and the next few days even, and whether there is some announcements that do come out of Wallabies camp about some players that are sort of ending their career here in France, because we don't expect to see much more action from the Wallabies in this World Cup, unfortunately. Now, we have spoken a fair bit about the Wallabies. There is more World Cup games to talk about in week 4. Let's have a quick break and then we'll dive into that content now. All right, let's get into the rest of the World Cup. So week 4 of Rugby World Cup 2023 has been run and done. Let's dive into Pool A. That's my pool. And then we'll run through the pools like we have the last few weeks. So the first result we had was against Uruguay and Namibia. Now, Uruguay did get the points there, 36-26 over Namibia. I think that is Namibia's last chance to get a win in this World Cup. And unfortunately, that has been done. Pretty tough World Cup campaign for them all up.
Yeah, a bit grim. It was always going to be, I think, as well, with France and New Zealand, inflicting a bit of pain. I was surprised, actually, by how well Italy went against them. It would have been nice to see them at least get a bonus point, but I think Uruguay quickly became everyone's second team over there. They've been playing really well, and I think they deserved that one.
Well, the second game of the pool was New Zealand-Italy. Now, I think this result surprised a lot of people. I definitely didn't see a result of this amount coming out. 96-17 was the final score. This really got blown away quite quickly by New Zealand. And considering that Italy is in the Six Nations and is in the top 10 nations on the world rankings, this probably isn't a good look for their campaign either.
Terrible look. And it's a statement win from New Zealand in every sense of the word. They dropped that first one against France. And really, this was the only big challenge in their pool for them to overcome. So for them to rack up a cricket score is pretty scary to think that, whoever's facing them in the quarterfinals is going to be in for a bit of pain. And poor Italy as well. You saw the commentary through the week about, of course we're a chance, can we do this? That would have been printed up and slapped onto every change room door in the Kiwi hotel, and that would have just been fuel on the fire. So feel bad for them, but it's pretty scary to think what New Zealand could do.
Very clinical performance from New Zealand, and I guess putting a lot of their doubters or silencing a lot of their critics so far in this tournament. So finishing up and how the standings currently look for Pool A after 4 weeks. We've got France in first place on 13 points, followed closely by New Zealand in second place on 10 points. They're currently tied with Italy on 10 points. They've all played 3 games. So I believe New Zealand has one more game. No, they've had their bye. I think Italy is due for their bye next. So New Zealand, you think, will pretty easily get out of the pool there. We've got Uruguay on 5 points in Namibia, played all of their games. Actually, Namibia is the only one that doesn't have a bye. There we go. It has their bye. It has played all their games, so they have the bye coming up. So Uruguay on 5 points there. So a fair few permutations to go around this this pool and how it shapes up. But realistically, I don't see a world where France and New Zealand don't go through to the quarterfinals.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think there's a world, well, it's a very small world, but Italy can still progress if they beat France. That's the penultimate, just the ultimate game of that pool, I'm pretty sure. is France playing Italy, and obviously Italy would need a full 4 points and deny France a losing bonus point to leapfrog them, assuming New Zealand gets the full 5 against Uruguay. So, the stranger things have happened. France have been known to drop a pool game at their own World Cup, famously against Argentina. Maybe we're in for a surprise, but I think on current form, you'd probably doubt it.
Yep. Let's move across into Pool B now. This is your pool.
Yeah, Pool B was an interesting weekend. The Scotland-Romania game was another statement game, I think, from a tier 1 against a middling tier 2 side. You got to feel for the Romanians. They've just been pumped from pillar to post throughout this entire World Cup so far. And the Scots, played their kind of expansive attacking rugby that could potentially threaten Ireland in their big game coming up this weekend. So very keen to see how Scots and Irish go, because there's a world in which both of them progress and the Springboks don't. But we'll touch on that in a tick. Darcy Graham, 4 tries, player of the match performance, also threw in a try assist, and they went at a point a minute. It was pretty much a procession for that whole game. So not much chop for the Romanians, unfortunately. Springboks find themselves in a really interesting position now. Destiny's really out of their hands. They've played against Tonga, and they did what they needed to do, got the bonus points, win, 49 points to 18. A bit ominous, I thought, seeing Andre Pollard back in the side and just kick beautifully off the tee. That's been the only real concern from the Springboks. And then Andre Pollard comes in, nails his first 4 from 4, and then they put him straight on the bench. So there's a huge weapon up the sleeve there for the Springboks if they do get to those, semi-finals, finals like we expect, and have someone who kicks at 90-95%. So really interested to see the Ireland-Scotland game. We'll touch on it in our preview, but that's the big one out of these results, because all 3 teams are still in the mix, Ireland, Scotland, and the Springboks. Any takeaways from this pool, Mitch?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've spoken about in the past was how good the Springboks have looked through this tournament, and that if there was one element of their game that they weren't quite firing at, it was taking their shots at goal and converting those into points. And Andre Pollard back this week alleviates all of those concerns, and we saw in this game that he just got everything that he kicked for. So had he been available against Ireland last week or the week before, I think it was week 2, then they probably win that game with the amount of points that they missed and how tight it was in the end there. So I think South Africa is getting themselves into a very nice place come quarterfinals time. I don't know if you saw this come out of the press conference. I don't know if it was in the team naming or the post-match presser, but there was a question asked to Jacques Ninebar around sort of what happens in the Scotland-Ireland game, and whether there is if he thinks that Scotland and Ireland might make some kind of backdoor agreement where they both do what they need to do to kick out South Africa. What were your thoughts on someone having the gall to ask that question to the Springbok coach?
Oh, for starters, it's shocking journalism. I mean, it's a leading question with only one answer in mind that you've pre-written down in your notebook. And of course he bit at that. It's South Africa. Everything's a conspiracy. The refs are this, the refs are that, rah, rah, rah. And he was always going to bite and say something, like it would be very disappointing, or something like along those lines is how it's panned out. It's a huge fluff piece, unfortunately. No one is going into this with any inkling or belief that match fixing goes on at this level. And it's rubbish, to be frank, that would be the case. It takes a very specific scoreline and iterations. I think for Scotland to win, I think they have to win by 8 exactly, or something like that. Deny Ireland a losing bonus point to kick him out. And it could happen. So the only reason that Jacques Ninebar even bid at that is because it's possible. There is a world in which Scotland wins that game. Again, it's a bit like Australia progressing. It's a small one, but it could happen. So I think we'll touch on it in our preview, but that article is just, for mine, total rubbish.
Well, the final placings for Pool B, or the placings up to this point in the game of the tournament, South Africa played 4 games on 15 points. Ireland in second place played 3 games there on 14 points. So South Africa have played all of their points, and they have a bye this coming weekend. Scotland played 3 points, played 3 games on 10 points in third place. Tonga and Romania both have played 3 games and are yet to score a point. So at the moment, it's very heavily tied between Scotland, Ireland, and South Africa for those 2 quarterfinal placings. And this weekend's matchups are going to be very exciting to see how that pool ends up playing out. Let's move across into Pool C. So we've already focused a lot on the Wallabies and Portugal game, 34-14 there. So the other game was Fiji-Georgia. Now, the final score in this one was 17-12 to Fiji. But there was a realistic opportunity in this game that Georgia maybe not could have gone on and won the game. But at one point, they were up, or they were denied a try that would have seen them, I think it was 16. If they got the kick, it would have been 16-0 at that point. That was a pretty big shock, and I think, to Fiji at that point in the game, that Georgia was playing so well and that Fiji didn't have things clicking as much as we had come to expect from them.
I agree, and I think this was always going to be the banana peel game for Fiji, coming off the huge high of their big defining tests at the start. Can you back it up and do what you need to do with a 4-point or a 5-point game against Georgia? And they did it tough, a bit of a flying, kick to clear the ball at the end, as Georgia raced through for a potential match winner. I mean, the relief on the Fijians' faces and the fear of losing that game, far outweighs any joy that they've given themselves their best shot to qualify since 2007. I kind of feel for the Georgians. Maybe they could have given us a shot, but Fiji did what Australia wasn't able to do, and it's win against the grain and win ugly and show that they can, get those ones, even if they don't deserve it. They can get the wins, and those champion teams are built on games like that. How many games have we lost in the Bledisloe that we deserve to win? It's all about exactly. Can you turn those terrible games into a dub? And that's what the Fijians did.
Yep. And so currently sitting after 4 rounds played, we've got Wales in first place on 14 points, Australia on 11 points, currently in second place. So it's Fiji's in third place on 10 points. So Australia's the only team that has played all of their games so far. So Wales, Fiji, Georgia, Portugal all play this coming weekend. It would take Fiji to not even get a losing bonus point against Portugal for Australia to go through. But realistically, that's not going to happen. Fiji should most likely get all 5 points in this game and finish second, probably not top of the table. You would expect Wales to go pretty well against Georgia. But as we've seen, Georgia are capable of coming close to everyone in their pool. So, big game coming up for Fiji, for Georgia, for Portugal, and for Wales. Unfortunately, the Wallabies have done all they can, and potentially we will have seen the last of them in World Cup 2023. Let's move across into Pool D. Now, this is Ando's pool. Ando isn't here, but the first game was Japan versus Samoa. Now, this was a tight game. I believe I tipped Japan. You tipped Samoa in our preview. The final score was 28-22 to Japan, so they did get the victory there. What were your thoughts around this game?
I was really surprised, actually. I was really backing Manu Samoa. I thought they'd be able to stand up and give themselves the best chance to qualify. Oh, goodness, I think the last time they might have qualified would have been 91, maybe, if they made a quarterfinal then. But Japan proving that there's still life in them. Now they give themselves an opportunity to take on Argentina for a spot in the quarterfinals this coming week, I think. And everything to play for in this pool now. We thought it was going to be the tough one to watch, but it's actually turning into a pretty interesting mix. What did you take away?
Yeah, that's right. I think this pool as well. So the Japan-Argentina game this weekend is essentially quarterfinal week 1, and will determine who goes through to the quarterfinal. So that's going to be a big matchup. I haven't seen too much of this game. I must admit, I was away for this weekend, so I'm just happy that Japan got the win and got me some points on the tipping front. But yeah, it would have been good to see Samoa at least get some points as well in World Cup 2023. The second game of Pool D was Argentina against Chile. Argentina did come away 59-5 victors in this game. Now, this, for the history buffs out there, this was the first time that we had an all South American game in a Rugby World Cup. And the lead up, the amount of singing, the crowd, the atmosphere was unreal for this game. I caught the first maybe 15, 20 minutes of this game, and I was quite impressed with how Chile hung with Argentina and put them under a fair bit of pressure. I wasn't expecting this type of scoreline when I turned it off and got back up in the morning and saw that they had put 50 points on them. But I think that's a good statement piece from Argentina, and it's something that they've needed to keep their World Cup dream alive, and a good sort of statement from Michael Checker and his boys.
Totally agree. It's the result that the Pumas had to put on Chile, the lowest ranked team at the World Cup. Regardless of how you like the Condors and their running rugby, this is a team that you need to be pasting if you're a quarterfinal contender, and that's what Argentina did. So full credit to them. And also on the South American front, to add a little geography to the history, the neighbours as well. They're not just, South American, on the same continent. They border each other, and it's super cool to see that rivalry and that passion from the international soccer world, tick over. There are a lot of, slightly familiar jerseys there from the round ball code. But no less passion. I'd say that this is up there with the, France-New Zealand game and the Ireland-South Africa game as some of the best crowds we've seen so far.
And so the final placings in the pools after 4 rounds. So we've got England in first place on 14 points. Argentina currently in second place on 9 points. They're tied with Japan as well, 9 points. So their matchup this weekend is going to be massive and will determine who goes through. I think out of everyone in the World Cup, England is the only team that has officially confirmed their place in the quarterfinals and can't lose it. So I don't think there's a chance that Argentina or Japan can catch up to England. So England are the first team in the quarterfinals for 2023, which is good to see. We then have Samoa on 6 points, followed by Chile on 0 points. So that's it for Pool D. That's the results there. All right, we're dragging on a little bit, so let's move into our Wallaroos and finish things up. So the Wallaroos did play their second game against New Zealand for the Laura O'Reilly Cup, and unfortunately they went down 43-3. Now, Lockie, you were following this one for rugby.com.au. What were some of the key takeaways you got from this game?
Oh, it was another tough game for our girls, and what I took away from it is that our second half fight back was really remarkable and should be applauded. So we were down 31-0 at halftime, and then we kept the Black Ferns scoreless for a tick over half an hour. We had a fantastic second half where we were able to control the ball a bit better. We kicked effectively, sort of short kicking game, pinning the Black Ferns back. But it was just a bit too little too late after that blitz at the start. We withheld the first 10 minutes, and then they just ran over the top of us. Catalan Barcolo, a couple of tries. Sylvia Brunt was massive through the middle. And Kennedy Simon and Ruahid Damut, their co-captains, are just star players. So, again, just showing the gulf between having that fully fledged program over there and our girls who need a bit of a boost back home.
I think one thing the Wallaroos we saw in the second half particularly, that they got a fair bit of dominance and parity with New Zealand when they kept the ball in tight. And they didn't allow New Zealand to throw the ball around as much and sort of unleash their back three particularly. So I think that's a big learning for them moving into World 15 in a few weeks. So if they can take that game plan and apply that to when they go up against England and Wales, they are playing Wales, aren't they?
And Wales and France.
Yeah, Wales and France. Cool, good. That'll be a big step forward for them, I believe. And if they can continue to keep the ball in tight, they should go a little bit better against some of those nations in World 15, which we're looking forward to as well. Now, Lockie, we had the Australian Rugby Shield played over the weekend. Do you want to run us quickly through how it went and who ended up getting the chockies in this one?
Yeah, we'll wrap it up. I think we touched on it briefly in the intro, but 16 teams from across the country. In the men's division, we had ACT and Southern New South Wales Griffins take it out. They beat Perth in the final. And then in the women's competition, we had New South Wales Country Corellas beat the Queensland Country Orchids in a really good final as well. And just quickly, if you've never heard of this competition or you haven't had the chance to watch it, jump on rugby.com today and tune in because it's a fantastic level of rugby. And personally, I would love to see this become, something that we see broadcast on your 9 even on the radio, maybe through Stan, because the quality of players and the way that the game is played is something that I think a lot of people would find familiar. It's very open rugby, very flowing, big collisions, a bit of argy-bargy when it needed. And it was just, played in really good spirit over 4 days at Ballymore. So I'm keen to see it pick up in years to come, and hopefully we can pump a bit more money into it and we can be previewing it, not just reviewing it and getting the message out there.
Yeah, and also another element of our pathway system that has been going on for some of the juniors, particularly, that Super Rugby, I think they're just calling it Super Rugby under 16s and Super Rugby under 19s competitions are currently being played, and they're all televised on Stan Sport as well. So we had the first weekend of both the 16s and 19s competition this weekend, and that is a mirror of Super Rugby AU. So we've got all of the 5 Australian provinces represented there: Waratahs, Reds, Brumbies, Force, and Rebels. Some good results from the Western Force in their I think it was the under 19s game. The under 16s for the Waratahs was pretty dominant in their win over the Brumbies as well. So some really good pathways that we've got going now for Australian rugby, and something that we've all been talking about with the Wallabies and how they've sort of underperformed at this World Cup. So it's good to see that this pathway is developing and that there is something in place for them. And just if you do get time, do tune in and give it a watch, because there's some really good, exciting talent that is coming through the systems. Hopefully Rugby Australia can do their best to keep them in the union game and not going across to rugby league. One thing I wanted to just quickly shout out before we finish up the pod, and a big shout out to Ben Hinder, who has got in touch on Facebook and drew our attention to the fact that there is, not only do we have an Australian team over in France before playing in the Australian the Professional Rugby World Cup, which is the Wallabies at the moment. We also have a team from Perth that's over in France playing in the Amateur Rugby World Cup. So a big shout out to the Southern Lions from the Southern Lions in Perth, Western Australia, who have been over representing Australia in the Mondial Rugby Amateur Tournament. They got through to the semi-finals. Unfortunately, they went down to the South African team a few days ago. But by all accounts, they've done us proud. They've been out there. They've put in a great performance through the pool stages and into the finals. Unfortunately, didn't get able to take out the Chockies, but well done anyway for them to getting that far in the tournament. It's great to see Australian rugby represented on the world stage in every capacity. So well done to them, and well done to everyone involved in that. That brings us to the end of the podcast. We have been dragging on a little bit tonight, but thanks for sticking with us. Thanks, Lockie, for joining me. We'll be back next week to wrap up the pool stages of the World Cup, maybe look a little bit forward to the quarterfinals and talk about who has made it, who hasn't, and which big teams aren't going to be featured for the Rugby World Cup moving forward. Very much looking forward to doing all of that. Hopefully Ando should be back too from his little Bali vacation, so you won't have just me dragging on a little bit as well. He can take over the hosting gig when he gets back, which should be good. Thanks everyone for getting to this point. We'll be back next week. We'll catch you then. Bye.
Bye.